Esto, esto, esto un party por debajo del agua. Baby, busca tu paraguas.
The SpongeBob movie, Sponge on the Run. Yes, SpongeBob is back for another feature-length adventure, and going computer animated on his journey. But unlike the last movie, where the only CGI featured was just the third act while the marketing put in way too much focus on just that part, this one is fully, or at least primarily, animated by computers. It's kind of like the first half of the 2000s, where now even SpongeBob has to ditch 2D in order to adapt and make his movies entirely in CGI. But the biggest significance with this movie is that this will mark as the first major milestone for the franchise without its renowned creator, Steven Hillenburg. Technically, the project was announced a few years before he passed away, but what makes this movie so notable in SpongeBob's history is that this will be the transition that will bring audiences to the world of a post-Hillenburg SpongeBob, and even now, I still don't think many are ready for that. But now that SpongeBob and Patrick are out to save Gary, will the previous title be correct that this is a wonderful sponge, or should we instead run from the sponge? Let's find out. The story. Before I begin, I just want to clarify that yes, you may notice that there are some prominent watermarks throughout the video. That's because when making the review, these were the only clips available that I could work with, so hope you don't mind.
What about that one?
Yeah, that one doesn't come off. I tried.
Anyways, unlike the previous times where the Krabby Patty secret formula being stolen played an essential role, this is mainly about Gary being stolen, and it's up to SpongeBob and Patrick to go save him. I know some SpongeBob fans will immediately call out the comparisons to previous episodes like Have You Seen This Snail, along with other noticeable links throughout the feature, but then again, Sponge Out of Water also had those types of similarities to older episodes, yet still came out pretty well. So it's not a problem that it's recycling plot lines from the series. However, what does make it a problem is how they use those plot lines in the feature, and this is where Sponge on the Run falls flat in comparison to its predecessors. I don't want to say that this is awful, but the biggest issue is that it doesn't feel like a legitimate movie. In terms of story, this just feels like a regular episode of the show, but just extended to around 90 minutes and given a much bigger budget. And boy, do some scenes feel like they've been extended, dragging on and on and on for a simple point that could have easily conveyed in just seconds. Like, did it really need those musical moments or a whole dream sequence just to say SpongeBob and Patrick should have some courage? That, and there's nothing conceptually that feels like it merits to have its own movie. I mean, this is about SpongeBob and Patrick going to Atlantic City to confront King Poseidon to save Gary. At most, it sounds like an idea that could be worth its own half-hour special, but far from the kind that could earn the engagement of the previous films. As a result, it feels like its purpose to exist is less because it had a great idea for another movie, and more because executives demanded that it should exist, and thus feeling like the filmmakers had a hard time figuring out what to do for the next feature. That, and there are some instances where they flash back to SpongeBob's childhood where he would first meet characters like Patrick, Sandy, and Squidward. Admittedly, those scenes alone are cute and even touching, but it's hard to ignore that their intentions are just to set up and promote the Camp Coral spin-off series.
Hello, little snail. What's your name? Gary, huh? Do you want to be friends? Me too.
But again, this is not to say that this is all bad. As it feels like an extended episode, it does have some of the charm of a regular SpongeBob episode, like the heart and the humor where it's not really laugh-out-loud funny, but can provide some chuckles from the characters' personalities and the unexpectedly random moments. In a way, there's nothing really wrong with the story. Maybe it's predictable at times, but for a SpongeBob episode, it's fine and gets the job done to be mildly enjoyable, but also, that's the problem with this film. The story is fine for an episode, not for a movie. The animation. While the story doesn't merit to be presented as a full-on feature film, at least the animation goes above and beyond what Nickelodeon usually puts out on television. There's no 2D style straight from the show. That's all swapped out to present the world of Bikini Bottom completely in CGI. The biggest goal for the visuals is to perfectly recreate the style of the series. In a way, to literally give a new dimension to the place and the characters that we all know and love. Yes, this was already done in the third act of Sponge Out of Water, but this one decided to do something a little more different. While the character design stayed true to the series, now their looks include more texture to give them a lot of additional detail and make the movie more refined as a computer animated feature. However, this can be a bit of a double-edged sword. There are some characters that do benefit with more textures instead of flat colors so that they can believably have more depth in their style, but there are others where they may have too much detail and can be a bit uncomfortable to look at. Especially with Sandy, where her fur makes her stand out from the rest like a sore thumb. As for the character animation, they are still as comedically expressive as they were in the show, which gives the animators a lot to play with, but they also have that lower frame rate in the style of the Peanuts movie and Into the Spider-Verse, which gives a bit of a television feel to the look of the picture. In this case, that's perfect, since this is a SpongeBob movie after all, and it ultimately makes it look like one of their stop-motion specials.
Road, 'cause we are all in it together, and that's forever. It's always summer.
And then there are the backgrounds, which deliver both something familiar and unique. On one hand, it does feature a lot of the series' aesthetics beyond imitating the loose art style, like the fact that this is a very colorful movie and, at best, it makes it very pleasing to look at. On the other hand, the feature does provide some nicely built and immersive environments like Atlantic City as this Las Vegas-style flashy city filled with rides and casinos, and Camp Coral as a more natural, kid-friendly camping area with plenty of activities and special little places to keep them occupied. Not to mention, as tradition with these SpongeBob movies, it does feature some blend of CG with live action, like with the dream sequence and Keanu Reeves in the tumbleweed, which they actually work, especially when the live action parts can be as nonsensical as the cartoons themselves. It may be debatable if Sponge on the Run is feature-worthy, but the animation certainly deserves to be displayed in a major movie. The characters. Like the previous times, a major factor for audiences to see this movie is to check out their favorite characters come back on another major adventure. In a way, yes, they are their usual selves, but there's just something about this movie where their charm isn't as effective as the previous times. Maybe it's because the story led this movie to not be very engaging, but their personalities here feel less like a strong point and more of a statement that this has very little to offer that's fresh and new to both newcomers and longtime SpongeBob fans. SpongeBob himself is the kind-hearted goofball that loves his pet snail Gary, Patrick is the more dim-witted best friend who wants to help SpongeBob, and the rest, like Sandy, Mr. Krabs, and Squidward, are the Sponge's additional friends who later help him to get out of a tough situation. As for Plankton, the film began establishing him as the antagonist of the feature, saying that he's the one who snail-napped Gary and gave him to Poseidon while also giving SpongeBob and Patrick the ride to Atlantic City. But then once they go on their road trip, Plankton's role and significance in the film gets quickly thrown out, leaving questions about the process of his plans remain unanswered and just have him be a part of the gang with Sandy, Squidward, and Krabs to rescue SpongeBob. Technically, the most that is newly revealed about these characters is their origin story of how they all met SpongeBob, and again, they are cute, but the intentions of those plans do remove some charm, and fans might not appreciate the way it might have contradicted some older episodes. Again, especially with Sandy. As for the new characters, the only significant additions are King Poseidon, the tyrannical ruler of Atlantic City who obsesses about his looks and needs Gary to get rid of his wrinkles, and Sage, a living tumbleweed with Keanu Reeves' head in it that acts like SpongeBob and Patrick's spiritual guide to lead them to Gary.
Hello. Call me Sage. Good name.
I'm made out of sage and I am a sage, so it works out pretty well.
For the rest, their roles are not memorably noteworthy or add much to the picture, but I will give credit that there are some performances that are a lot of fun to watch, like Danny Trejo as this evil obstacle the protagonists have to face, and of course, Keanu trying to keep his cool when guiding a couple of idiots. In fact, I'd even say the voice cast did a great job on their part as well, so there's nothing wrong with the acting in this movie. But when it comes to the materials that the characters were given for the picture, they really had little to work with. Among all the SpongeBob movies, Sponge on the Run is easily the weakest of the three. Technically, there isn't anything terrible about the film, especially when it has really nice animation that stays true to the style of the show, some nice heart and humor, and fun performances, but unlike the previous two, this doesn't feel like a legitimate movie. This is just a 90-minute regular episode of the show that's also a promo for the Camp Coral spin-off series, resulting this to be a lot less engaging and a lot less enjoyable than its predecessors. I'm not saying it's not good, but it does feel disappointing that its writing can only reach the same standards as what's usually produced on television instead of aiming higher like before. I can imagine people having a good time watching this, but I'd recommend for both SpongeBob fans and newcomers to lower their expectations on this one. There's no rush to go check this one out, and if you do see this, treat it like one long episode rather than something like the SpongeBob SquarePants movie or Sponge Out of Water. That way, you could save yourself from possibly feeling a bit let down. You won't find this among SpongeBob's lowest points in his legacy, but I think it's safe to say that Gary wasn't missing much while he was missing.
Oh, I love your sense of irony, Patrick.
Thank you. I love my sense of ironing too.